My father-in-law, Arthur Vance, was the kind of old-money Boston elite who treated everyone outside his bloodline like a temporary contractor. When he passed away from a sudden stroke in his Beacon Hill estate, the entire family gathered in his mahogany-lined study for the reading of the will, wearing standard-issue wealthy grief, expensive black wool, and practice size. I sat in the corner, holding my husband Julian's cold, sweating hand, fully expecting to hear that Arthur had left his multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio exclusively to Julian and his sister, Beatrice. Instead, the family attorney pulled out a sealed manila envelope, looked directly at me with a mixture of pity and terror, and read a clause that legally handed 90% of the entire Vance estate, including the historic properties and the primary trust fund, directly to me. The room went so quiet you could hear the traffic down on Charles Street. Julian slowly let go of my hand, his knuckles turning white as he stared at me like I had just pulled a weapon on him. Beatrice stood up so fast her Chanel pearl necklace caught on the edge of the desk, snapping the string and sending hundreds of dollars of freshwater pearls scattering across the hardwood floor like teeth. She didn't even look down. She just pointed a manicured finger at my face and screamed that I was a social climbing gutter rat who had somehow poisoned her father's mind. But the most terrifying part wasn't Beatrice screaming or the attorney sweating through his custom-tailored shirt. It was the look on my husband Julian's face, a look of pure, calculated hatred that told me our 5-year marriage had been a complete lie, long before the will was ever read. If you have ever sat across from a family member and watched their entire soul rot right in front of your eyes because of a dollar sign, drop a comment below, because this part of the story still messes with my head to this day. To understand why a billionaire tech investor like Arthur Vance left his entire empire to a middle-class graphic designer from Ohio, you have to understand the kind of marriage Julian and I actually had. We met at a charity gala in Manhattan where I was working the digital media production, and he was the charming, Harvard-educated heir trying to distance himself from his family's suffocating shadow. For 5 years, I thought we were a team. I supported him when his startup flopped. I took out personal loans to cover our rent in a trendy brownstone when his father temporarily cut his allowance, and I endured years of passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Eleanor, who loved to remind me at Thanksgiving dinners that my family didn't belong in the same zip code as theirs. What I didn't know was that while I was working 80-hour weeks to keep us afloat and build a life together, Julian was playing a completely different game. 3 months before Arthur died, Julian started leaving his phone face down on the kitchen counter. It's the classic cliché, right? The sudden password changes, the sudden late-night business dinners in financial districts, the sudden influx of high-end colognes I hadn't bought him. I'm an observant person by nature. You have to be when you design corporate brand identities for a living, and I started noticing subtle shifts in his behavior. But I didn't find out the truth through a text message or a rogue lipstick stain. I found out because Arthur Vance called me into his office in Boston completely alone, bypassing his own son entirely. Arthur was a brutal man, but he wasn't stupid. He sat me down in that massive leather chair, pushed a glass of scotch toward me, and slid a physical file across his desk. Inside were dozens of high-resolution private investigator photos of my husband, Julian, at a luxury resort in Miami, holding hands and sharing a cabana with a 24-year-old Instagram influencer named Chloe, who happened to be the daughter of one of Arthur's primary hedge fund competitors. But the photos weren't even the worst part. The worst part was the transcript of a wiretapped phone call Arthur's security team had intercepted between Julian and his mother, Eleanor. In that recording, Julian literally laughed about how easy I was to manipulate. He told his mother that he was only staying married to me until his father passed away and the inheritance cleared, because his father's trust rules strictly stated that married heirs received a 20% bonus payout to encourage traditional family values. Julian explicitly said, and I will never forget these exact words as long as I live, "Don't worry, Mom. Once the old man kicks the bucket and the cash hits my Chase account, I'm filing the paperwork. Clara is getting a basic settlement, and Chloe and I are moving to the villa in Cabo. She's just a placeholder." I remember sitting in that grand office, feeling the room tilt on its axis, looking at my father-in-law while my chest felt like it was cave-in. I looked up at Arthur, my eyes burning with tears, expecting him to defend his son or tell me to pack my bags to avoid a public scandal. Instead, Arthur leaned back, took a slow sip of his drink, and said something that changed the trajectory of my entire life. He told me that his son was a weak, spineless parasite who had never worked a real day in his life, and that his daughter Beatrice was a blackout alcoholic who would burn through the family wealth in 6 months. He said he had spent 40 years building the Vance legacy, and he would rather burn it to the ground than watch his narcissistic son use it to fund a mistress, while discarding the only woman who actually loved him for who he was. Arthur looked me dead in the eye and said, "Clara, I am changing my will tomorrow morning. Everything goes to you under a strict, ironclad corporate trust. If you divorce him now, they will find a way to contest it based on undue influence. You stay married to him. You don't say a single word. You play the doting, clueless wife for a few more months until my health fails. Let them think they're winning. And when the time comes, you take every single dime and you run." Subscribe if you enjoy emotional real-life stories with actual receipts, because what happened next is exactly how a quiet girl from Ohio dismantled a multi-million-dollar legacy without ever raising her voice. For 3 grueling months after that meeting, I lived in absolute psychological purgatory. I woke up every morning next to a man who was actively planning my financial ruin and emotional disposal. I cooked him breakfast, I kissed him goodbye before he went to his fake office job, and I listened to him complain about how stressful his life was. Every time his phone buzzed with a text from Chloe, I had to pretend I didn't see the screen light up with heart emojis. Every time Eleanor called him to gossip about how I dressed or how my family didn't have a pedigree, I had to smile and offer her tea whenever she visited our apartment. The emotional trauma of pretending everything is fine while your entire reality is rotting underneath you is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I lost 12 pounds. I couldn't sleep. But every time I felt like breaking down, I would log into the secure digital drive Arthur had set up for me, a drive that contained the full forensic audit of Julian's secret bank accounts, his text exchanges with Chloe about what kind of house they were going to buy with my future father-in-law's money, and the legal drafts of the divorce petition Julian's lawyers had already prepared to serve me the week after Arthur's projected passing. Then the stroke happened. Arthur passed away on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Thursday night, before the funeral had even been arranged, Julian was already in our living room drinking expensive champagne, talking about upgrading our lifestyle, and calling realtors in Malibu. He looked at me with this sickening, patronizing pity and said, "Clara, baby, things are going to change for us now. You won't have to work those exhausting freelance gigs anymore. I'm going to take care of you. We can finally live the life we deserve." I just nodded, swallowed the absolute bile rising in my throat, and said, "I can't wait, Julian." Which brings us right back to that mahogany line study in Beacon Hill, where the attorney had just dropped the nuclear bomb on the entire Vance bloodline. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was complete chaos. Julian didn't even wait until we got into the car. He dragged me into the hallway of the law firm, his face red, his breath smelling of stale coffee and panic. He grabbed my upper arms, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to show his desperation, and hissed, "What did you do? What did you do to my father, Clara? Did you blackmail him? Did you sleep with him? Tell me the truth." I just looked at him, completely calm, keeping my voice down so the secretaries could hear how level-headed I was compared to him, and said, "Julian, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just as shocked as you are. Your father must have seen how much I sacrificed for this family." Within 24 hours, the mask completely slipped off the entire family. The wealth elite don't grieve, they litigate. By Friday evening, I received an email on my personal account from Eleanor's high-powered Manhattan divorce and estate lawyers. It wasn't a request for a meeting, it was a brutal, threatening demand. They offered me a flat $1 million buyout to sign away all rights to the Vance estate and agree to an immediate, uncontested divorce from Julian, citing irreconcilable differences. The email explicitly stated that if I didn't sign the agreement by Monday morning at 9 o'clock, they would launch a massive public lawsuit alleging that I had used elder abuse, psychological manipulation, and undue influence on an ailing, senile old man to steal his fortune. Julian came home that night acting like a completely different person. He didn't offer to make dinner. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He threw his briefcase onto the kitchen island, stood over me while I sat on the couch, and tossed a physical copy of that settlement contract onto my lap. He looked at me with pure disgust and said, "You need to sign that, Clara. Don't be greedy. $1 million is more money than your entire family in Ohio will see in 3 generations. If you take this to court, my mother's legal team will destroy your reputation. They will dig up every piece of dirt on you. They will make sure you never work in this country again. Just take the money, sign the paper, and let's end this cleanly." I looked up at him, my heart pounding against my ribs, and I asked him one simple question to see if there was even a single drop of humanity left in his body. I said, "Julian, do you love me? Did you ever love me, or was I really just a placeholder until your father's money came through?" He laughed. A short, sharp, ugly laugh that echoed through our high-ceiling department. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and said, "Let's be real for once, Clara. Look at yourself. You're a middle-class designer from a public school. You really thought Vance was going to spend the rest of his life with you? You were convenient. You kept the house clean, you paid the bills when my startup was resetting, and you made me look stable for my dad's board of directors. But you're completely out of your depth here. Sign the papers, or we will ruin you." That was the exact moment the last remaining shred of grief and hesitation left my body. I looked at him, gave him a very small, very polite smile, and said, "Okay, Julian. I'll let your mother's lawyers know my decision on Monday morning." Over the weekend, Julian was completely absent from the apartment. Thanks to the shared location feature on our old iCloud account that he had forgotten to unlink from my iPad, I could see his phone pinging at a 5-star hotel in downtown Boston, and then later at a high-end jewelry store. He was already spending the $1 million he thought he was saving by forcing me into a corner. He was probably celebrating with Chloe, telling her that the nightmare was almost over and that the trailer park wife from Ohio was finally signing the paperwork. Monday morning arrived. The deadline was 9 a.m. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I walked into the grand conference room of Vance and Associates on the 42nd floor of a financial district skyscraper. Sitting around the massive glass table were Eleanor Vance, looking like a venomous black widow in her designer mourning clothes, Beatrice, who looked hungover and angry, Julian, who was wearing a smug, victorious grin, and 3 corporate litigators whose hourly rates could have paid my parents' mortgage for a year. Eleanor didn't even look me in the eye. She just tapped her gold pen on the table and said to her lead attorney, "Let's get this over with. Does the girl have the signed release?" I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table, opened my leather briefcase, and pulled out 5 thick, identical bound folders. Instead of handing them the signed settlement agreement, I slid a folder to Eleanor, one to Beatrice, one to Julian, and one to their lead attorney, keeping the last one for myself. Julian frowned, his smug smile faltering slightly as he flipped open the first page. "Clara, what is this? This isn't the settlement paperwork. Stop playing games." I leaned against the back of an empty chair, folded my arms, and spoke in the calmest, most measured voice I have ever used in my entire life. I said, "You're right, Julian. It's not a settlement. What you are looking at is a comprehensive legal brief that my own legal team is filing with the probate court and the federal district court at exactly 9:15 a.m. if you do not sign the unconditional surrender documents on the back page." The lead attorney laughed, a patronizing corporate chuckle. "Mrs. Vance, I don't think you understand how this works. We have grounds to tie up your father-in-law's estate in litigation for the next 10 years. You will starve out before you see a single dollar of that trust. We will allege mental incompetence on Arthur's part." I looked at the attorney and said, "Turn to page 14, counselor." The room went completely silent as the pages started turning. On page 14 were the full, unredacted transcripts and audio logs of Arthur Vance's personal medical evaluations, conducted by 3 independent chief neurologists from Massachusetts General Hospital, dated just 2 weeks before his death. All 3 evaluations stated that Arthur was in perfect cognitive health, possessing absolute mental clarity and full testamentary capacity. Arthur had known exactly what his family would try to do, and he had legally insulated his decision to leave everything to me with foolproof medical receipts. But that was just the appetizer. I looked at Julian, whose face was slowly draining of all color as he turned to the next section. I said, "If you turn to page 22, you will find the complete forensic accounting records of the shell company Julian set up in Delaware 6 months ago. You will see that Julian illegally diverted over $800,000 from his father's commercial real estate accounts to fund his personal lifestyle, his luxury trips to Miami, and a down payment on a luxury condo under Chloe's name. In the state of Massachusetts, that is not just a civil issue, that is corporate embezzlement and grand larceny from an estate." Eleanor's head snapped toward her son, her eyes wide with shock. "Julian? What is she talking about? What company?" Julian couldn't even speak. His jaw was literally hanging open, his hands trembling so badly that the paper was rustling in the quiet room. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. How do you have this? Where did you get these bank records?" I didn't answer him. I just kept going, my voice steady, cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "And if you turn to page 35, you will find something special for you, Eleanor. It's the full audio transcript of the phone call between you and Julian, where you both explicitly discussed letting me pay off Julian's personal debts while planning to dump me the second the inheritance cleared. It also includes the text messages where you, Eleanor, referred to my family as Midwestern white trash and discussed how you were going to use your connections on the board of the trust to illegally alter the distribution dates before Arthur even passed away." The lead attorney's face went completely pale. He looked at the documents, looked at the audio transcript codes, and then looked at Eleanor and Julian. He knew instantly that this wasn't a desperate bluff from an emotional widow. This was a completely built, rock-solid federal case that would not only destroy the Vance family name in the press, but would likely land Julian in a federal penitentiary for financial fraud. The attorney leaned over, whispered urgently into Eleanor's ear, and then pulled Julian back by his shoulder. Julian looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate pleading. The arrogance was completely gone. The high society prince had vanished, replaced by a terrified boy who had just realized he had lost absolutely everything. "Clara, please," Julian whispered, his voice cracking as he reached across the glass table toward me. "Clara, we can talk about this. We're a family. We've been together for 5 years. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was under so much pressure from my mom and my dad. I love you, Clara. You know I love you. We can fix this. We can take the money and move away from all of them. Please don't do this to me." I looked at my husband, the man I had saved for, the man I had cried for, the man who had called me a convenient placeholder just 72 hours ago, and I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating coldness. I slid a new piece of paper across the table to him. It was a complete, unconditional waiver of any marital assets, a final divorce decree with 0 alimony, and an immediate eviction notice for the Beacon Hill apartment, which was legally owned by the trust that now belonged entirely to me. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:58 a.m. I said, "You have exactly 2 minutes to sign these waivers, Julian. If your signatures aren't on these pages by 9 o'clock, my lawyers walk into the courthouse and the Boston Globe gets a digital copy of this entire folder. Your mother's social standing will be completely erased by lunchtime, and you will be talking to a criminal defense attorney by this evening. Sign the papers." Eleanor was shaking, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the glass table so hard her nails looked like they were going to snap. She looked at her son, her voice cracking with pure, bitter defeat. "Sign it, Julian. Sign it right now." With trembling hands, Julian grabbed the gold pen, the same pen his mother had been using to threaten me just minutes earlier, and scribbled his signature across the bottom lines of the divorce and estate waivers. Beatrice was crying silently in the corner, realizing that her trust fund, her luxury lifestyle, and her safety net had just been handed to the girl she used to mock at the dinner table. I waited until the ink dried, picked up the signed documents, placed them neatly back into my briefcase, and zipped it closed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back at Julian as he sat there with his head in his hands, weeping silently into the glass table. I walked out of that 42nd floor conference room, down the long marble hallway, and stepped into the elevator. As the elevator doors closed and began their smooth descent toward the ground floor, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't see a stressed, exhausted, insecure girl trying to earn the love of a toxic family. I saw a wealthy, independent, incredibly powerful woman who had taken her life back from the people who tried to destroy her. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you think I handled this betrayal the right way. Arthur Vance wanted his legacy to go to someone who actually understood the value of loyalty, hard work, and survival. And as I walked out into the crisp Boston morning air, a free woman with $90 million in a secured trust, I knew I was going to spend every single day making sure I proved him right.